everyone, Jackie Edwards here. Welcome back to our second video in our three-part video series. So we are talking about rent to rent, and this video I want to talk to you about basically covering, does rent to rent still work? I know there's been loads of questions about that lately with all of the kind of tax changes and the regulation changes and just a lot of the uncertainty that's been in the market lately. A lot of people are wondering, is rent to rent still working? Is it still worth it? Is property investing in general still worth it? So that's what I want to cover in today's video. Now, if you are just joining us for the first time, make sure you go back and check out video number 1. Now, that video is the 5 things you must do before you're getting started in rent to rent. So we covered some super, super important stuff and a little bit of an introduction as to who I am. Because if you don't know who I am already, you're going to want to catch it up on that video because I'm not going to go into loads of information all about me again on this video. You can Google me. I've written a couple of books. My name is Jackie Edwards. I do rent to rent, and that is my specialty. But go back to the last video, learn more about me, and learn more about what I think you need to do to get started in rent to rent. So we can jump straight into today. Does rent to rent actually still work? Is it still worth doing in today's market? So I'm not going to go into loads of detail on what all the changes were and how how they impact every single person because it's going to impact people differently. So we've got things like the Section 24 tax changes. Now, this is for property owners, and mostly it impacts high income property owners. They can deduct less tax. They can deduct less interest from their taxes. It also impacts some of the wear and tear allowances, but that's specifically aimed at property owners. With rent to rent, you do not own that property. So really, it doesn't impact you directly in your business. So the changes in the Section 24 tax laws will not impact your rent-to-rent business directly because you don't own that property. It may have some impact on the property owner, but again, I wouldn't get involved in advising your property owner on any kind of tax issues unless you are an accountant. But if you are not an accountant that specializes in tax, I would say if your landlords ask you anything about it, you refer them to an accountant that can give them the right information for their specific situation because the Section 24 tax stuff is going to affect people differently and it's being phased in over time. So honestly, with that one, I don't think it's a huge impact on the rent to rent market because you're not owning the property. And the owner's tax situation is theirs to kind of figure out. Other changes, one of the big ones that's just been getting talked about lately is Section 21 eviction notices. The government wants to do away with them. Now, again, I don't think this is something we should be stressing out about right now. We're in the consultation period. There is a process to go through before this gets rolled out. And my belief is that they are going to be revamping the entire eviction process because they can't just get rid of the Section 21 eviction notice without putting more processes in place around, the different Section 8 and the different types of notices that are available because the whole system needs to be revamped. Basically, it's broken, and I think this is the government's way of acknowledging that and saying, we know the system is broken. We don't think Section 21 is doing what it's supposed to do. It was supposed to be the no fault eviction. So if you just needed to have a tenant out of the property for no particular reason, Section 21 was the way to do it. If there was a reason, so rent arrears, antisocial behavior, you were supposed to use a Section 8 notice. Now, because the Section 8 notice is just so complicated and just horrible, basically, most people use a Section 21 notice, even if there is, rent arrears or something like that, which isn't exactly what it was designed for. So my thoughts are that they're going to be revamping this whole process. But again, you don't need to worry, I think, because first of all, I've very rarely ever evicted any tenants. I think that a good referencing process and a good kind of gut feel check about is this person the right person for my property will help you avoid most of the issues that come up with having to evict tenants and getting bad tenants into the property. Of course, over time and the more properties you have and the more tenants you have, there will always be one or two or three that eventually cause a problem. So looking back across my portfolio, I mean, we've had hundreds and hundreds of tenants. I would say over the last 5 years, I've probably had at least no, God, more than that, probably around 300 tenants come through my properties. Out of those, we have had one that was a reasonably difficult eviction, just because there were some mental health issues and things like that involved. Um, and that is the only eviction that really caused a problem. We've had a couple of tenants that we've had to pay to leave just because, again, going through the eviction process can be a bit of a pain. So paying them to leave was cheaper than going to court. And you'll still be able to do that. So anyways, I don't think that that is a reason to say I'm not going to get into property investing. I'm not going to get into rent to rents, because the bottom line to all of these and all of these changes and all the future changes that are going to happen is that's what happens in business. If you're looking to get into rent to rent, if you're looking to get into property investing, you're looking to get into a business. And in business, regulations change, the ways we do business changes, and you need to be able to be flexible enough to be able to change as the business environment and the business world changes, because those are the businesses that are able to grow and move forward, are the ones that can kind of see change coming and be flexible enough to move with it and adapt as the change happens. So that's what you're going to want to be thinking as you're starting your business, and you're going to want to be looking for the opportunities where other people are scared. So a lot of people are saying, oh my God, they're getting rid of Section 21 notices. What are we going to do? I'm going to get rid of my entire portfolio because, it's not worth being a property investor. It's not worth, running properties anymore. When there are people like that, that's when it's a great time for you to come in and just see how you can look at things differently. So think through, all right, these people are scared, these people are pulling out. How can I use this as an opportunity? So it could be a good opportunity for you to start picking up more properties. Start using that in your marketing to say, oh my gosh, are you a landlord that is worried about Section 21 notices going away? How are you going to evict your tenants? Don't worry, we can take care of all of that for you. We've got specific systems and processes in place, first of all, to make sure that we don't have bad tenants that need to get evicted. And we know the process. We are here to specialize in understanding all the regulation changes, and we will deal with all of your tenants. So you won't have to worry about any of the headaches, any of the nightmares of any tenant issues. So we'll do any evictions that are necessary, so you won't have to worry about it. And it can be just as easy as explaining that to people. So it's looking for the opportunity in these changes. Let me just look at my list. So a couple of other things that are coming up. Brexit. Brexit is a really big one I see people talking about, and it's making a lot of people nervous about the property market. First of all, they're thinking, oh, all the tenants are leaving. There won't be as many tenants because all the Europeans will be going back to Europe, and there just won't be as many people looking to rent. Again, I think that in most markets, that's not going to happen. In some markets, they might be hit a little bit, but in most markets, there are still Europeans that are going to stay in the UK. Some will still go back, more will come. It's always an ebb and a flow throughout the year and throughout over the years of, when people are coming and going. So I think we are still a small island. There is still a housing shortage. There will still be people looking to rent your properties. Now, you may need to improve the quality of your properties. So you might have lots of HMOs, a few less tenants, so your rooms need to be a little bit better. Or if you're doing serviced accommodation, your property might need to be just that little bit better than all of your competition so that the people are more attracted to you and stay with you first. So I think that's where your focus needs to be, not saying, oh, Brexit, there are going to be no more tenants, there's going to be no more guests, nobody's coming to the UK anymore. What am I going to do? Everything's going to be a mess. It's just looking at how can you improve your product that you're providing to your customers, basically. How can you improve it so they want to pick yours over somebody else's? Because there will still be people coming, there are still people looking for houses. You just need to make sure yours is at the front of their mind. Now, Brexit is causing some uncertainty at the moment. So I do see less people looking to move. So if people have a halfway decent place that they're living in right now, they are more likely to stay in it than to look for somewhere new in the near term while we've got the uncertainty about Brexit. Also, companies aren't hiring as much at the moment because they've got uncertainty as well. So they want to make sure they're prepared for anything that's going to happen. So with that uncertainty, there is just a little bit of slowing in the market. But again, I don't think that's a reason to not get into rent to rent or to not be pushing forward with your business. Because again, there is opportunity in everything. So if you can just look at your market, get to know your area, get to know your ideal tenant or guest type, then make sure you're catering to them and make sure you're keeping them happy, then they're going to want to live in your property. And you're not going to struggle as much to fill your rooms or fill your short-term accommodation. So we just have to make sure we're flexible and make sure that we've got ways of understanding what change is coming, when something's a little bit different, and be able to kind of go with the flow and make sure we're staying on top of these changes. And there are easy ways to do all of these things. And a lot of it comes down to systems and processes and how you're tracking your key performance indicators in your business, how you're tracking market trends, and you don't have to be spending hours and hours a day, reading news reports and checking reports and reading white papers and things like that. Um, I don't do any of that, and I feel like I am on top of things enough to make sure that we're keeping our properties ticking over and running smoothly. Um, let's see, we've got HMO licensing and Article 4. So there have been lots of changes in HMO licensing over the past year or so. More areas are bringing in Article 4 legislation, which again scares a lot of investors away from an area. As soon as you say it's got Article 4 or there's HMO licensing or additional HMO licensing, people are like, oh, don't work in that area, don't work in that area. I started in Oxford, which has both Article 4 and additional HMO licensing. So it's very, very strict from the council. There's very, very strict guidance on HMOs and making sure you've got the planning permission and the licensing for them. I was able to build my business there, even though it had those two things in place. And I've seen a number of other people in other Article 4 areas and additional licensing areas build their businesses up. So again, I think that's not something to worry about. And honestly, sometimes if you're in an Article 4 area, most people don't want to invest there. So you've got a little bit less competition. And there, when you've got Article 4 or additional HMO licensing, it's because there are so many HMOs, the council is usually trying to just keep them under control and make sure the quality and the standards stay up. So that means you've got a larger market of people to talk to about helping them take over their properties and helping them manage their properties. And there's lots of tenants there because there's already lots of HMOs there. So people wouldn't have put lots of HMOs together unless there were enough tenants for them. So don't be scared off by these things, especially if other people that maybe aren't as big in property investing or aren't having the same goals as you have, if they're scared or if they're saying, oh no, it doesn't work, don't do it, stay away from that, just do your research and think about it a little bit more and think about how you can make it work to your advantage. What else do we have? Service accommodation. So that's been a big topic lately. So service accommodation is quite new in the market. And of course, the hotels hate it because it's taking business away. So there's been lots of lobbying from big hotel and travel chains to governments to say, don't allow people to do Airbnb and to rent out their apartments as short-term accommodation anymore, because it's ruining their industry. And there's lots of news about, oh, it's just for big parties and there's all these problems with it and it's unsafe for all the neighbors. So it's basically they're just stirring up problems because they don't want it to be there because it's hurting their business. So, in London, we've got the 90-day rule, which if you haven't heard of that for your short-term accommodation, if you've got if you want to rent out a flat in London, that's just a normal residential home, if you can only rent it for 90 days in a year. So that's not 90 days at a time, but a maximum of 90 days during a whole 365-day period. Now, that right now is just in London, but of course there's talks about this happening in other cities. Honestly, this is something that's happening, worldwide. So big cities like, Paris and New York and other bigger cities are talking about the same things. They've got the same pressure from the hotel industry to try to put a lockdown on service accommodation. So again, it's something to make sure you're mindful of. So if you're going into service accommodation and you're going into it in London, you're going to want to make sure you understand exactly how it works and what permissions you need to be able to rent that property out as a short-term accommodation for more than 90 days in a year. If you're outside of London, you just want to make sure you've got your finger on the pulse of, what the council is doing and any changes that they might want to make in the future. But again, if the one nice thing about rent to rent is you don't own that property. So if you've got a service accommodation somewhere and maybe 3 years down the line, all of a sudden everything changes and, the 90-day rule comes in your city. And all of a sudden your service accommodation isn't going to be profitable anymore and you can't run it. With rent to rent, you don't own that property. So you can just go back to the owner. You'll have a good break clause in your contract and you'll say, Mr. Owner, this property no longer works for me. I am going to give you notice based on our break clause and I will be giving your property back to you. And it's as simple as that. Whereas if you own that property and all of a sudden something changes, it's going to be harder to sell it because nobody else is going to be able to use it for what you were using it for. So things are just almost that little bit more risky in times of uncertainty when you're buying properties versus just doing rent to rent. Because at the end of the day, if we think Brexit and every European all of a sudden leaves the UK and now we don't have enough tenants to fill your properties, with rent to rent, you don't own that property. So you can just say, I'm sorry, Mr. Landlord, it didn't work out. Here's your property back. And it's as simple as that. Whereas again, if you own that property and it's, been a rented property and you're trying to sell it on, it's going to be very, very difficult because nobody else will be looking for investment properties to buy at that point in time. And there'll be a mass, there'll be lots of houses available because all the Europeans have somehow left. Again, I don't think that's going to happen. But I see rent to rent as almost being that future proof for your business. You don't have to worry so much about what happens if everything changes in a couple of years and if this property doesn't work for me anymore in a couple of years, because you can hand that property back to the owner and mitigate any losses that you might have because of government regulation, economic changes in the future. So you have that little bit extra protection with rent to rent, which I think makes it awesome. As a previous accountant, I am reasonably risk averse. I like to get into things that are less risky or that I know I can mitigate my risk, which is something that really attracted me to rent because when things change, if I've calculated my numbers incorrectly and that's just a crappy deal and I just assessed it wrong, I can always hand that property back to the property owner following my break clause that I've got in my contract and cut my losses and move forward with my life. So a lot less risk there and a lot less risk surrounding all of these new changes that are coming in. What else did I write down? Client money protection. Oh, that one's a whole huge pain. So that's something new that's just come in earlier this year that we just need to be aware of. Again, it's a good thing, I think, that the government is looking at the letting industry because I think there is room for improvement in standards. There are a lot of dodgy agents out there. There are a lot of people letting out substandard housing. I don't think it's most of them. I think most houses and most landlords and most agents are good people trying to do the right thing. But there is some work that needs to be done to just make sure we take those other properties and those other landlords and those other agents up with us in their standards. So client money protection is basically around holding deposits, and all letting agents need to be signed up for this now. And there's a lot of different, basically, box ticking exercises that you need to go through. So it's more regulation, but it's not something to be scared of. It's also a bit more cost, but it's the cost of doing business. So you need to make sure, like we talked about in the last video, that you've got this plan, that you know how much things are going to cost, that you looked through everything so that you've got a budget, you've got a realistic idea of how this business is going to work and how you're going to get it started so that you're prepared if changes happen, if you need to spend a bit more money on something else, that it doesn't completely ruin your business and make you go bankrupt. These things are all figure outable. You can plan through all of them, and they're not a reason to not do rent to rent or to not get into property investing. And GDPR was the last one. That's the data protection things. Now, that was a whole big, that was last year's kind of big change, and that was across the entire business industry. So that didn't just impact, lettings and property investing. And it just shows you that there are changes that always happen that affect businesses as a whole. So it's just making sure again that you've got a way of staying on top of things by, watching videos like this, joining some of the better Facebook groups that share more information, being a part of the NLA or the RLA that send out weekly newsletters and regular newsletters when things are changing or when there's something of note that, investors and landlords need to know. It's being involved in those things so that you just stay on top of what's happening in the industry, what changes are coming, so that you can make those changes in your business. And it's making sure you've got a little bit of time to spend every week just reflecting on where you're at in your business, what's happening kind of around you, and how you can take advantage of it and make the best opportunity that you can. So none of those things that I've talked about, I think, have any impact on you staying away from rent to rent. I would not, if I was just getting started today, none of these things that I've listed out, Section 24, Section 21, getting rid of, Brexit, HMO licenses, Article 4, service accommodation crackdown, 90-day rule, client money protection, GDPR, none of those things would stop me from starting my business from scratch again today. It would just make me look a little bit deeper into how I can mitigate the risks that any of those provide and just be able to move forward with my business in a forward-looking manner, looking for the opportunities where other people see the fear and the hardship. That's what you need to do in rent to rent. And I think this is a great time to take advantage of all of these things because so many people are afraid of getting into property investing right now because of all the changes. But if you open your mind and look at it as a business and as a way of getting you what you want for your future, whether that's, more time with your family, more money to be able to, invest in your time, invest in your education, to be able to invest in new cars and new houses and wonderful holidays, whatever it is that you want for your future, it's just looking at this is a business that's going to help provide that for you and making sure you understand how any changing regulations will impact you, but then how you can take advantage of them and make the most out of them. So definitely rent to rent is still something that is very, very viable and very profitable. And I think that it is a great strategy for the near term while we are in a period of uncertainty around Brexit and changing regulations. I think rent to rent right now is better than buying properties because of that uncertainty, because I think we're at the top of another kind of housing peak, getting ready to go into maybe a slight recession or a slight downturn, where you don't want to be buying loads of properties at the top of the market. You want to wait until they've gone down in price and you're down at the bottom of the market. Buy low, sell high, not buy high, sell low. Where you can rent to rent now while property values are high, make that money, get those profits, get your business running, get really good at what you do. So when the market downturns and when the kind of change happens, you're ready to scoop up the deals. You've got the money set aside, you've got the experience so that you're ready to jump in, scoop up the deals that come, and build your business even faster from there. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. I hope you have enjoyed that video. I hope that's helped you feel more comfortable about rent to rent and moving forward in your business. Don't let any of these things hold you back from getting started. There is nothing that we've talked about today or in any of the last video that should hold you back from getting started. Everything is figure outable. There is a way to move forward and get past everything as long as you take the time to set it up properly and to do the right thing. So thank you for joining me today. If you like this, make sure you share this with your friends. Make sure you are subscribed so that you get notified for the next video, which will be coming out in a few days' time. It is going to be absolutely awesome, and I can't wait to see you then.